My name is Carmen Mitchell, 27 years old, living in Boston as an art curator. I was raised by my grandparents after my parents abandoned me as a baby. After 25 years of silence, my biological parents suddenly reached out wanting to reconnect. I was hopeful, excited, even thinking this might fill the void left by my grandparents' passing. Then came their wedding day, where they publicly called me their past mistake. But that betrayal paled in comparison to what I discovered later. Before I dive into how my own parents betrayed me twice, let me know where you watching from, and hit subscribe if you have ever had someone from your past try to re-enter your life. I grew up in a modest home in suburban Massachusetts with my grandparents Martha and William Mitchell. They took me in when I was just 6 months old, after my teenage parents decided they weren't ready for the responsibility of raising a child. Though we never had much in terms of material wealth, my childhood was rich with love and support. My grandmother was a dedicated elementary school teacher, and my grandfather worked at the local post office for over 30 years. Despite their modest incomes, they always made sure I had everything I needed. From an early age, I showed an interest in art. I would spend hours drawing with whatever supplies my grandparents could afford. When they noticed my passion, they scraped together extra money for proper art supplies and classes at the community center. I remember my grandmother skipping her weekly hair appointments so I could take a Saturday morning painting class. My grandfather would work overtime sorting mail during the holidays so he could buy me special colored pencils for Christmas. Their sacrifices never went unnoticed, even by my young self. Growing up, I had very few details about my biological parents, Diane and Jack Sullivan. My grandparents kept a small photo album with a few pictures of them from high school. They were careful never to speak ill of them in front of me. All I knew was that they had been high school sweethearts who found themselves expecting a baby at 17. They made the decision to let my grandparents, who were Diane's parents, to raise me while they finished school and figured out their futures. Your parents were just children themselves, my grandmother would say gently, whenever I asked about them around my birthday or family gatherings, when their absence felt most pronounced. They wanted you to have stability they couldn't provide. As I got older, I sensed there was more to the story that my grandparents weren't telling me. Sometimes when I asked questions, I noticed my grandfather's jaw tighten, or my grandmother quickly change the subject. But their protectiveness came from a place of love, and I learned to stop asking questions that clearly made them uncomfortable. Throughout school, I channeled my curiosity and occasional feelings of abandonment into my artwork and studies. My dedication paid off when I received a full scholarship to the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. My grandparents beamed with pride at my graduation, my grandmother wiping away tears as I accepted my diploma. That day, there was a brief moment when I scanned the audience, wondering if my biological parents might have somehow heard about this milestone and shown up. They hadn't. After college, I landed an internship at a small gallery in Boston that eventually turned into a full-time position. By the time I was 25, I had worked my way up to curator, helping to discover and showcase emerging artists. My career was flourishing, and I felt a sense of purpose and achievement. But there were still moments, particularly when I saw families together, that I felt a pang of longing for something I had never experienced. Then my whole world shifted when my grandfather was diagnosed with lung cancer. The disease progressed rapidly, and he passed away just 4 months after his diagnosis. My grandmother, who had been by his side for 52 years, seemed to lose her will to live after he was gone. She followed him just 6 months later, doctors said from heart failure. But I knew it was from heartbreak. Losing them both in such a short period left me adrift. Though I was an adult with a successful career, the loss of the only parents I had ever known made me feel like an orphan for the first time. They left me their modest savings and the family home, which I sold to buy a small one-bedroom apartment in Boston closer to my work. The inheritance wasn't substantial, but it represented their lifetime of careful saving and their desire to see me secure. In the aftermath of their deaths, as I sorted through old family photos and keepsakes, the question of my biological parents resurfaced with new urgency. With my grandparents gone, there was no one left who knew the full story of my birth and abandonment. No one to answer the questions that had lingered in the back of my mind for years. I considered searching for them online, but always stopped myself. If they had wanted to know me, they had had 26 years to find me. I was not difficult to locate. I had lived in the same town most of my life, had a public profile through my work at the gallery, and even had a small write-up in a local arts magazine. They clearly had made their choice. Or so I thought until one ordinary Tuesday morning when I received a Facebook message that would upend everything. Carmen, this is Diane Sullivan. I'm your birth mother. I hope this message finds you well. Jack and I have been thinking about you and would love to reconnect if you're open to it. We understand if you're not ready. Just know we've never stopped caring about you. I stared at the message for hours, my heart racing, unsure how to respond or if I should respond at all. After all these years of silence, why now? Part of me wanted to ignore it to protect myself from potential disappointment or rejection. But a larger part, a part that had always wondered and waited, was already composing a reply. 2 days after receiving Diane's message, I agreed to meet them at an upscale cafe in downtown Boston, just a few blocks from the gallery where I worked. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, and chose a table near the back where I could see the door. When they walked in, I recognized them immediately from the few photos I had, though they were now in their mid-40s instead of teenagers. Diane was elegant in a cream-colored blazer, her blonde hair cut in a sleek bob, designer sunglasses perched on top of her head. Jack was tall and broad-shouldered in a tailored suit, silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. They looked like they had stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine, and I suddenly felt underdressed in my simple black dress and gallery-appropriate flats. When Diane spotted me, her hand flew to her mouth and tears immediately welled in her eyes. Jack placed a supportive hand on her back as they approached my table. The next moments were a blur of awkward hugs, tearful greetings, and stammered introductions. "You look so much like my mother," Diane said, studying my face with wonder. "Those are definitely the Mitchell eyes." "She has your creative side, though," Jack added quickly. "We've seen your work online. The gallery exhibitions you've curated are impressive." They had been following my career. Something about that revelation made me feel both touched and slightly unsettled. How long had they been watching from afar? Over expensive lattes and pastries that they insisted on paying for, they shared their story. They had been high school sweethearts who broke up shortly after I was born. The stress of teenage parenthood too much for their relationship. "We were just kids ourselves," Diane explained, her manicured fingers wrapped around her mug. "We thought we were doing what was best for you by letting my parents raise you. We knew they would give you stability and love." "We always intended to be part of your life," Jack continued. "But time passed, and it became harder to figure out how to enter your life without disrupting it. Then we both moved away for college, built separate lives." They told me they had reconnected at their 20-year high school reunion 3 years ago. Both had been through unsuccessful marriages to other people. Finding each other again had felt like fate. "And now we're engaged again," Diane announced, showing me a diamond ring that caught the light from every angle. "We're having a proper wedding this time, the one we never got to have." "That's wonderful!" I managed, genuinely happy for them, despite the complex emotions swirling inside me. "Congratulations." "Actually," Jack leaned forward, his expression earnest. "That's partly why we wanted to find you now. We're finally getting our lives right, doing things in the order we should have all those years ago, and we felt it wouldn't be complete without you there." "We'd love for you to attend our wedding," Diane said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "As our special guest. It would mean the world to us." I was speechless. After a lifetime of absence, they weren't just asking to meet occasionally for coffee. They wanted me at their wedding to be part of one of the most significant days of their lives. It was more than I had ever expected. "We know it's a lot to ask," Jack acknowledged when I remained silent. "And we understand we haven't earned the right to have you there. But we're hoping this can be a new beginning for all of us." As we continued talking, they asked about my life. I told them about growing up with their grandparents, about my art education, and my current position at the gallery. When I mentioned my grandparents' passing, they expressed what seemed like genuine sympathy. Mom was always so good with children, Diane said softly. I knew she would give you everything I couldn't at 17. They told me about their own lives too. Diane was now a marketing executive for a luxury retail brand, and Jack was a financial advisor with his own practice. They lived in a waterfront condo in a prestigious part of Boston and traveled frequently for both business and pleasure. We should take you to Paris, Jack suggested enthusiastically. The galleries there would inspire your curatorial work. And the shopping, Diane added with a light laugh. Every woman should experience Paris shopping at least once. By the time we parted ways 3 hours later, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite sort through. There was joy at having finally met them, cautious hope about building a relationship, but also an undercurrent of something I couldn't name. Perhaps it was simply the surreal nature of sitting across from the people who had created me, but had been strangers my entire life. We'd love to see your apartment sometime, Diane said as we exchanged phone numbers, to see the life you've built for yourself. And you must come see our place too, Jack added. We're having a small engagement dinner next weekend. Nothing fancy, just a few close friends. Would you join us? I agreed, too overwhelmed to do anything but nod. As I watched them walk away hand in hand to their sleek BMW, I felt like I was watching characters from a movie rather than my own parents. They had re-entered my life as suddenly as they had exited it 27 years ago, and I had no idea what would happen next. That evening, I found myself staring at the invitation to their wedding that Diane had pressed into my hand before leaving. It was on thick cream-colored cardstock, with gold foil lettering set for just 2 months away at an exclusive beachfront venue on Cape Cod. The formality and expense of it all made me wonder what I should wear, if I should bring a gift, and most importantly, what role exactly they expected me to play in this elaborate celebration of their love. I also wondered, as I placed the invitation on my refrigerator with a magnet, if this was the beginning of having the parents I had always secretly wished for, or if I was setting myself up for disappointment by letting them back into my life so quickly. Over the next few weeks, I met with Diane and Jack several times. We had coffee dates near my gallery and dinners at upscale restaurants where they always insisted on paying. With each meeting, I shared more about my life, and they seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. But I began to notice certain patterns that gave me pause. They asked numerous questions about my financial situation. At first, they seemed like normal parental concerns. How was I managing on a gallery salary? Was my apartment in a safe neighborhood? Did I have good health insurance? But the questions became increasingly specific. Did your grandparents leave you anything substantial? Diane asked during our third meeting, stirring her martini with casual interest that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just their savings in the house, I answered. Nothing extravagant, but enough for a down payment on my apartment. Real estate in Boston is valuable, Jack commented, perking up. Even a modest home in the suburbs would fetch a good price now. You must have done well on the sale. I nodded noncommittally, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. They seemed disappointed when I didn't offer specific figures. Another red flag appeared when they began sharing stories about themselves. While they talked extensively about their current lifestyle, vacations, and possessions they shared, remarkably few details about the 25 years we had been apart. When I asked direct questions about their previous marriages or careers, they would provide vague answers before quickly changing the subject back to me or their upcoming wedding. That part of our lives wasn't important, Jack would say with a dismissive wave. What matters is now and the future we can build together. One evening, about a month after our initial reunion, they invited me to dinner at their condo. The waterfront property was as impressive as they had implied, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor and sleek modern furnishings that looked straight out of a design magazine. Everything screamed wealth and careful curation of image. During dinner, they dropped a surprising request. "We've hit a bit of a snag with the wedding." Diane began exchanging a look with Jack. "The venue is demanding the final payment earlier than we expected. With the stock market fluctuations, our investments are temporarily tied up," Jack explained, swirling his expensive scotch. "We hate to ask, but we wondered if you might be able to help us out. Just a small loan until things settle. How much are you thinking? I asked, taken aback. 3,000 would get us through this crunch, Diane said quickly. We'd pay you back right after the honeymoon, of course. $3,000 was not a small sum to me. It represented a significant portion of my emergency savings. But the earnestness in their expressions and my desire to solidify our new relationship led me to agree. The next day, I transferred the money to the account Jack provided, telling myself it was a gesture of good faith toward the parents who were trying to make amends. A week later, they asked to see my apartment. I was hesitant at first, my small one-bedroom feeling inadequate after seeing their luxury condo. But they insisted they wanted to see where I lived, to get a fuller picture of my life. During their visit, I noticed Diane wandering into my home office while Jack was supposedly using the bathroom. When I followed her, I found her looking through papers on my desk. Just admiring your organizational skills, she said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. So different from me. I can never keep track of anything. Later, I realized my birth certificate and social security card, which I kept in a folder in my desk drawer, were slightly out of place. I brushed it off as paranoia. Why would my own parents be interested in those documents? My friend Layla, who had joined us for dinner that evening, expressed concerns after they left. They seem very focused on your finances, she observed cautiously. And they ask a lot of questions without sharing much about themselves. It feels imbalanced. They're just trying to catch up on everything they missed. I defended, though, a small voice inside me acknowledged her points. Maybe, Layla conceded. Just be careful, Carmen. Sometimes people re-enter our lives with agendas that aren't immediately clear. I dismissed her warnings, but they lingered in my mind, especially when Jack called a few days later asking if I would sign some papers for a family insurance policy they wanted to establish. It's just a formality, he assured me, a way to legally recognize our relationship now that we're reconnecting. Something about the request made me uncomfortable. I told him I'd need to review any documents carefully before signing, which seemed to frustrate him. Don't you trust us, Carmen? We're your parents. That statement struck me as odd. They were biologically my parents, yes, but they hadn't earned the trust that comes with actually parenting. Still, I felt guilty for my suspicions. Wasn't I being unreasonable holding their past absence against them, when they were clearly trying to make things right? As the wedding approached, I introduced them to my boss and colleagues at an exhibition opening. They charmed everyone, but I noticed they exaggerated their role in my life and career. We always knew Carmen had extraordinary talent. Jack told my boss as if they had been nurturing my artistic abilities all along. We encouraged her every step of the way. Diane nodded in agreement, adding, her success is no surprise to us. Creativity runs in our family. I stood nearby speechless at their fabrications. My colleagues, unaware of our complicated history, seemed impressed by my apparently supportive parents. I didn't correct the narrative, not wanting to create an uncomfortable scene at a professional event. Later that week, Diane took me shopping for a dress to wear to the wedding. She selected increasingly expensive options, encouraging me to splurge. You should get the blue one, she insisted, referring to a designer dress that cost more than a month of my salary. You only get to see your parents remarry once. When I hesitated due to the price, she seemed disappointed in me, making me feel guilty for being practical. In the end, I purchased a dress that stretched my budget considerably just to see her approval. The dress shopping was followed by another emergency, where they needed to borrow my car for a weekend because theirs was in the shop. When they returned it, I found the gas tank nearly empty and strange documents in the glove compartment that they must have forgotten to remove. Despite these unsettling incidents, I continued to give them the benefit of the doubt. I wanted so badly to believe in this newfound relationship that I ignored the warning signs flashing all around me. It wasn't until the wedding day itself that I could no longer deny the truth about Diane and Jack Sullivan and their intentions toward me. The day of Diane and Jack's wedding arrived with perfect weather, a gentle breeze coming off the ocean at the exclusive Cape Cod venue they had selected. The ceremony was set to take place on the beach at sunset, followed by a reception in a glass-walled pavilion overlooking the water. Everything about the setting screamed expense and careful planning. I arrived early, nervous, but excited to be part of this significant day. I had spent hours getting ready in my new blue dress, wanting to make a good impression on the extended family members I would be meeting for the first time. Perhaps I thought hopefully I might even connect with cousins or aunts and uncles who had wondered about me over the years. Diane spotted me as soon as I entered the venue's preparation area. She was stunning in her wedding gown, a champagne-colored silk creation that highlighted her slim figure and blonde hair, which was now styled in an elegant updo. "Carmen, you made it!" she exclaimed, air kissing both my cheeks. "You look lovely. That dress is perfect on you." "The venue is beautiful," I told her sincerely. "Everything looks amazing." "Jack spared no expense," she said proudly, gesturing around. "We wanted this day to be perfect, a proper celebration of our love story finally coming full circle." As she introduced me to her bridesmaids and the makeup artist, I noticed she didn't explicitly mention I was her daughter. Instead, she used vague terms like, "This is Carmen, who is very special to Jack and me," or "Carmen is joining our family celebration today." Jack appeared shortly after, handsome in his tuxedo, a glass of scotch already in hand, despite the early hour. "There she is," he said warmly, giving me a one-armed hug. "Our guest of honor." Again, not "our daughter," but "guest of honor." A distinction that felt significant, though I couldn't articulate why. As more guests arrived for the pre-ceremony cocktail hour, Jack introduced me to various relatives. The pattern continued. I was never clearly identified as their daughter, and most people seemed surprised to learn of my existence at all. I had no idea Jack had a child from before. One older woman whispered to her companion when she thought I couldn't hear. "Diane never mentioned a baby." Another conversation fragment caught my ear as I passed a group of Jack's college friends. "Guess he's making amends for past mistakes before starting fresh," one man said with a knowing chuckle. "Good PR move." Each interaction left me feeling increasingly uncomfortable, like an exhibit on display rather than a daughter being welcomed into a family. But I pushed down my discomfort, telling myself I was overthinking things. This was their special day after all. It wasn't about me. The ceremony itself was beautiful, with Diane walking down an aisle of rose petals scattered over the sand as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. They exchanged heartfelt vows about second chances and fate bringing them back together. I watched from my seat in the front row, feeling both part of the celebration and oddly separate from it. It was during the reception that everything fell apart. The pavilion was decorated with thousands of white flowers and twinkling lights, creating a magical atmosphere as guests enjoyed a lavish five-course meal with paired wines. I was seated at a table near the front, but not at the main family table, another subtle indication of my status. After dinner, Jack stood to give a speech, champagne flute in hand. He thanked everyone for coming, spoke lovingly about Diane, and then his gaze found me in the crowd. "I also want to acknowledge someone who represents a new beginning for us," he said, gesturing toward me. "Many of you don't know this, but Diane and I have a history that predates our adult relationship. Carmen here is the product of that history." There was a murmur of surprise from many guests. My cheeks burned as all eyes turned to me. "We were just kids when Carmen came along," Jack continued, his tone shifting subtly. "Too young to know what we wanted or needed. And while we may have made mistakes in the past, we believe in setting things right when possible." He raised his glass higher. "So here's to fresh starts and leaving past mistakes behind us as we begin this new chapter." Past mistakes. The words echoed in my head as scattered applause and awkward laughter rippled through the crowd. He had just referred to me, his own child, as a past mistake in front of 200 people at his wedding. I sat frozen, my champagne untouched, as he finished his speech and the music resumed. Around me, people began dancing and celebrating again, but I couldn't move. The room seemed to spin slightly as the full weight of his words sank in. When I finally excused myself to the restroom, I found Diane touching up her makeup at the vanity. Our eyes met in the mirror, and I couldn't hold back. "Jack just called me a past mistake in front of everyone," I said, my voice shaking. "Do you have any idea how that feels?" Diane turned, sighing as if I had complained about something trivial like the food or music. "Oh, Carmen, don't be so sensitive," she replied, applying another coat of lipstick. He didn't mean it that way. Jack was just acknowledging that our timing wasn't right back then. We're including you now, aren't we? That's what matters. Including me, I echoed in disbelief. You've introduced me to everyone as some vague special guest, not as your daughter. Half the people here seem shocked to learn you even have a child. Well, it's complicated, she said defensively. Most of these people don't know our full history. We didn't want to overwhelm them with details. Details, I repeated. I'm not a detail Diane. I'm a person. I'm supposedly your daughter. Her expression hardened slightly. You are our daughter, and we've made an effort to bring you into our lives. I think you could show a little more gratitude and a little less criticism on our wedding day. Gratitude. The word struck me like a physical blow. I was supposed to be grateful that they had abandoned me for 25 years. And then when they finally reached out, treated me like an afterthought, borrowed money from me, and publicly referred to me as a mistake. I left the reception shortly after that conversation, unable to maintain the facade of the happy reunited family. As I drove back to Boston that night, tears streaming down my face, I began to question everything about our reconnection. The suspicions I had pushed aside came flooding back with new clarity. Why had they really reached out after all these years? Was it truly about making amends? Or was something else going on? Their excessive interest in my finances, the borrowed money, the mysterious documents. What was I not seeing? The next morning, I received a text from Diane, acting as if nothing had happened. Thank you for coming yesterday. The pictures look beautiful. Let's have brunch next weekend to show you all the details you missed at the reception. Love you. Love you. 2 words that should have warmed my heart but instead left me cold. I didn't respond, needing time to process the hurt and confusion I was feeling. Little did I know that my silence would be short-lived, as events were already in motion that would reveal the true nature of Diane and Jack's interest in me. 1 week after the wedding, I received a notification from my bank about unusual activity on my accounts. At first, I assumed it was a routine security alert, the kind banks send when you make an unusually large purchase or travel to a new location. But when I logged in to check, my blood ran cold. There had been multiple transfers from my savings account to an external account I didn't recognize. 3 transfers of $5,000 each spread over the last 2 weeks. $15,000 gone without my authorization. My first thought was that my account had been hacked by some anonymous cybercriminal. I immediately called the bank's fraud department, my hands shaking as I navigated the automated system to reach a representative. The customer service agent was sympathetic and thorough, asking me to verify recent legitimate transactions while placing a temporary freeze on my accounts. When she provided the details of the unauthorized transfers, including the receiving account information, something about the account number sparked a memory. Can you tell me the name on the receiving account? I asked, a sickening suspicion forming. I'm afraid we can't share that information directly, she explained. But the police can obtain it once you file a report. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately went to my desk to find the account information Jack had provided when I lent them the $3,000 for their supposed wedding emergency. The paper was gone. In fact, several papers appeared to be missing from my files. Frantically, I searched through my apartment looking for my birth certificate and social security card. They were gone too. So was my passport, which I kept in a drawer in my bedroom. My mind flashed back to Diane wandering into my home office, to Jack's extended bathroom break during their visit. They had been searching for these documents all along. I called Layla, who came over immediately. Together, we did a thorough inventory of what was missing and contacted the credit bureaus to place a fraud alert on my accounts. What we discovered was even worse than I initially feared. Someone had opened 3 credit cards in my name, all maxed out with charges totaling over $27,000. There was also evidence that my identity had been used as collateral for a business loan of $50,000. Between the bank transfers, credit cards, and loan, they had stolen or committed me to over $90,000 in debt. This can't be a coincidence, Layla said, her expression grim, as we sat surrounded by bank statements and credit reports spread across my living room floor. Carmen, I think your parents targeted you specifically for this. I can't believe they would do this, I whispered, though the evidence was becoming undeniable. Why would they go to all this trouble to reconnect with me just to steal my identity? They're successful themselves. They have that expensive condo, the luxury cars. Maybe they're not as successful as they want you to believe, Layla suggested. Those things could be leased mortgaged to the hilt, or even borrowed to create an impression. The next day, I met with a bank security officer who had more information after their preliminary investigation. The pattern suggests this wasn't a random hack, he explained gently. The perpetrators had access to your physical documents and personal information. They knew answers to your security questions and had enough details to convince customer service representatives they were you when they called. I nodded numbly. It was my parents. My biological parents. His expression softened with sympathy. I'm very sorry. Unfortunately, that's consistent with what we see in many identity theft cases. Family members often have the access and information needed to commit this type of fraud. He recommended I file a police report immediately and gave me the contact information for identity theft resources. He also suggested hiring a private investigator if I wanted to gather more evidence before going to the authorities. I decided to follow his advice about the private investigator. Something told me this wasn't Diane and Jack's first scam. I needed to know what I was dealing with before confronting them or involving the police. The investigator, a retired detective named Marcus, took my case with a seriousness that validated my concerns. Within 3 days, he had compiled a disturbing report. Your parents, or the people claiming to be Diane and Jack Sullivan, have a history of financial scams, Marcus explained as he laid out his findings. They've operated under at least 3 other aliases in different states. They typically target individuals with whom they can establish a personal connection and who have good credit but modest financial sophistication. He showed me newspaper clippings and court records documenting similar schemes in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. They would ingratiate themselves with victims often through claims of family connection or romantic interest, then steal identities and max out credit before disappearing. How did they find me? I asked, still struggling to process that the people I had believed were my long-lost parents were actually professional con artists. That's where it gets interesting, Marcus replied, pulling out a local arts magazine. You were featured in this article about up-and-coming curators 6 months ago. It mentioned you were raised by your grandparents after your teenage parents gave you up for adoption. It even named the gallery where you work. For people like them, that's essentially an invitation. I remembered the article. I had been so proud of the recognition, never imagining it would lead predators to my door. Are they really my parents? I asked the question that had been haunting me since these revelations began. Marcus's expression was gentle but firm. I can't answer that with complete certainty without DNA testing. But I found no record of a Diane and Jack Sullivan having a child 27 years ago in Massachusetts. The birth records don't match the story they told you. I felt sick. Not only had they stolen my money and identity, but they had also stolen my hope, my vulnerability, my desire for family connection. They had seen my deepest longing and exploited it without remorse. With Marcus's report in hand, I finally contacted the police. The detective assigned to my case was compassionate but realistic about what lay ahead. Identity theft cases are complicated, she explained, especially when there's a personal relationship involved. We'll need your full cooperation to build a case against them. I agreed to whatever was necessary. Part of me was terrified of confronting these people who had so skillfully manipulated me, but a stronger part was furious. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had toyed with my emotions, mocked me at their fake wedding, and tried to destroy the financial security I had worked so hard to build. As I left the police station that day, I made a decision. Before the legal process took over, I wanted answers directly from them. I wanted to look them in the eyes and hear them try to justify what they had done. I may have been their victim, but I refused to remain powerless. It was time for a confrontation of my own making. 3 days after filing the police report, I stood outside the waterfront condo building, where Diane and Jack lived Layla by my side for moral and physical support. We had timed our visit for evening when Marcus's surveillance confirmed they were typically home. In my bag was a folder containing copies of all the evidence I had gathered, bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers, credit reports detailing the fraudulent cards, and Marcus's comprehensive report on their history of scams. "Are you sure about this?" Layla asked as we waited for the doorman to announce us. The police advised against confronting them directly. "I need to do this," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not just for the case, but for myself. I need them to know they didn't break me." The doorman returned, nodding. "They've agreed to see you, Miss Mitchell." The elevator ride to the 12th floor gave me time to collect my thoughts. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, but now that the moment was approaching, my heart hammered against my ribs. When the elevator doors opened, I took a deep breath and strode down the hallway, with as much confidence as I could muster. Jack opened the door before I could knock his expression a careful mask of concern. "Carmen, what a surprise," he said, stepping back to let us in. "We've been worried about you. You haven't answered our calls or texts since the wedding." Diane appeared from the kitchen, a glass of white wine in hand. She was dressed casually but expensively in silk loungewear, her hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. "Darling, we thought something might have happened to you," she said, her tone dripping with false concern. "Is everything all right?" "No," I replied, simply meeting her gaze directly. "Everything is not all right." I placed my folder on their glass coffee table and opened it, spreading out the bank statements and credit reports like cards in a losing hand. "Would either of you care to explain these?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. Their reactions were subtle but telling. Jack's posture stiffened slightly, while Diane's grip tightened on her wine glass. Their eyes met briefly in silent communication, before Jack let out a practiced laugh. "What are these supposed to be?" he asked, not touching the documents. "Evidence," I replied, "of how you stole $15,000 from my bank accounts, of how you opened credit cards in my name and maxed them out, of how you used my identity to secure a business loan." "Carmen, these are serious accusations," Diane said, setting down her wine and adopting a hurt expression. "We're your parents. Why would we do something like that?" "That's exactly what I want to know," I responded. "Why would you pretend to be my long-lost parents just to steal my identity?" Jack's demeanor shifted, his friendly facade hardening into something colder. "You have no proof we did any of this." "Actually, I do," I countered, pulling out Marcus's report. "I hired a private investigator. He found your previous scams in 3 other states under different names, and he couldn't find any record of a Diane and Jack Sullivan having a child 27 years ago in Massachusetts. You're not even my real parents, are you?" The room fell silent. Layla stood slightly behind me, her phone recording the conversation in her pocket as we had planned. Finally, Jack spoke, his tone entirely different now, contemptuous and dismissive. "You really shouldn't have done that, Carmen." Diane sighed dramatically, setting down her glass. "Well, this is disappointing. We had such plans for you." "For me or for my credit?" I asked. "For both," she replied with a shrug. "You were such a perfect target. Successful enough to have good credit, naive enough to trust quickly, and so desperately wanting parents that you overlooked every red flag." Her casual cruelty stole my breath momentarily. "So none of it was true. You just saw that article about me and decided to pretend to be my parents." "It was a business opportunity," Jack said coldly. "Nothing personal. You should be flattered we chose you. We don't target just anyone." "How can you say it's nothing personal?" I demanded, anger rising. "You invaded my life, manipulated my feelings, stole my identity." "Oh, please." Diane rolled her eyes. "Don't act like you're the victim here. You owe us for giving you life." "What?" I asked, genuinely confused. "We are your biological parents," Jack clarified with a smirk. "That part is true. We just haven't used our real names in a very long time. Finding you was actually a happy accident." "When we saw that article with your photo, Diane recognized your eyes immediately. They're her mother's eyes." I felt the room tilt slightly. They were my parents after all. Somehow that made their betrayal even worse. "If you're really my parents," I said slowly, "that makes this even more despicable." "No, what's despicable is how your grandparents stole you from us." Diane snapped, her composure cracking. "Martha always thought she knew better than everyone else. She convinced my father that we weren't fit to raise you." Because you weren't, I shot back. You abandoned me when I was 6 months old. We were teenagers, Diane shouted. We made a mistake. And then when we tried to get you back a few years later, they refused. Said we were unstable, unfit. Jack placed a hand on Diane's arm, calming her. What your mother is trying to say is that your grandparents kept you from us. Everything that happened after that, all our choices, that's on them. I shook my head in disbelief. No, you don't get to blame them for your actions. They gave me love, stability, and support. What have you given me? Lies, theft, and public humiliation. We gave you life, Diane repeated coldly. And now you're trying to ruin ours with these accusations. You ruined your own lives with your choices, I responded. And I'm not just making accusations. I've already filed a police report. The banks are investigating. It's only a matter of time before you face charges. Jack's expression darkened. I strongly suggest you reconsider that path, Carmen. We have friends in high places. We could make things very difficult for you. Are you threatening me? I asked, standing my ground. I'm giving you an opportunity, he replied smoothly. Drop this nonsense and perhaps we can come to an arrangement. We'll even say we're sorry for the misunderstanding at the wedding. We can try again be the family you clearly still want. The manipulation was so transparent now that I could see their true colors. How had I ever fallen for their act? There is no misunderstanding, I stated firmly. You stole from me. You lied to me. And now you're threatening me. The only arrangement I'm interested in is one where you return everything you've taken and turn yourselves in. That's not going to happen, Diane said with a cold laugh. And good luck proving anything. It will be your word against ours. Who do you think people will believe, the successful, charming couple, or the unstable, attention-seeking daughter? I believe the evidence, I replied, gathering up my documents. And so will the authorities. As Layla and I moved toward the door, Jack called after me. If you pursue this, we'll destroy your reputation. By the time we're done, your precious gallery won't want anything to do with you. I turned back one last time. My grandparents taught me that character is what you do when no one is watching. They would be disgusted by you both, and so am I. But they also taught me to stand up for myself, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Once outside the building, my legs nearly gave out from the adrenaline crash. Layla guided me to a bench where I took several deep breaths. You were amazing in there, she said, squeezing my hand. Now we have their confession on record, too. The next morning, I met with an attorney who specialized in identity theft cases. He reviewed all my evidence, including the recorded conversation from the confrontation. This is a strong case, he assured me. The recording may not be admissible in court depending on state laws, but it gives us a clear picture of what we're dealing with. These people are professional con artists who happen to also be your biological parents. Over the next several weeks, I navigated the complex process of legally pursuing them. There were statements to give, forms to file, and hearings to attend. Throughout it all, I remained focused on one goal, ensuring they couldn't do this to anyone else. As my attorney had warned, they didn't go down without a fight. They hired an expensive lawyer who tried to paint me as a scorned daughter seeking revenge. They created fake social media accounts to send me threatening messages. They even reached out to my colleagues at the gallery, spinning tales about my mental instability. But the evidence against them was too substantial to overcome. The bank records clearly showed the unauthorized transfers. The credit card companies confirmed the fraudulent accounts. And perhaps most damning, Marcus uncovered 2 other victims in New Hampshire who came forward with nearly identical stories of manipulation and theft. When the case finally went to court, I testified about everything from our initial reunion to the wedding humiliation to the financial crimes. Standing in that courtroom facing them across the aisle, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I was no longer the hopeful, naive woman so desperate for parental connection that I ignored every warning sign. I was a survivor determined to see justice done. The judge's ruling came as a vindication. Diane and Jack, whose real names I learned were Diana and John Mercer, were found guilty of identity theft, fraud, and financial exploitation. Due to plea agreements and their skill at working the legal system, they received lighter sentences than I hoped for 3 years, probation, mandatory restitution of all stolen funds, and 200 hours of community service each. The financial damage would eventually be repaired through the court-ordered restitution and the fraud protections from the banks and credit card companies. But as I left the courthouse that final day, I knew the emotional wounds would take much longer to heal. I had found and lost my biological parents twice now, once as a baby when they abandoned me, and again as an adult when they betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. In the months following the court case, I struggled with trust issues that affected nearly every aspect of my life. I became hesitant to share personal information with anyone. I double-checked every financial transaction with paranoid attention to detail. I even found myself questioning the motives of longtime friends, wondering if they too might be hiding ulterior motives beneath their kindness. Recognizing I couldn't navigate this trauma alone, I started seeing a therapist who specialized in betrayal and abandonment issues. Dr. Harriet Taylor had a gentle but straightforward approach that helped me begin to process the complex grief I was experiencing. "You're mourning multiple losses," she explained during one of our early sessions. "The actual grandparents you lost, the imagined parents you hoped for, and the future relationship you briefly thought was possible. All of those deserve to be grieved." Through weekly sessions, I slowly began to untangle the knot of emotions. Anger at Diane and Jack for their manipulation, shame at having been so easily deceived, guilt over not having appreciated my grandparents enough while they were alive, and a profound sadness for the family connections I might never experience. "It's natural to feel embarrassed about being deceived," Dr. Taylor assured me. "But con artists are successful precisely because they're skilled at identifying and exploiting people's vulnerabilities. Your desire for family connection wasn't a weakness, it was a normal human need they weaponized against you." Rebuilding my sense of security took concrete actions as well as emotional work. I invested in a comprehensive identity protection service, installed a security system in my apartment, and changed all my accounts' passwords and contact information. Though the courts had ordered Diane and Jack to stay away from me, I didn't trust them to comply. My career became both a challenge and a lifeline during this period. Initially, I was terrified that the public nature of the case would damage my professional reputation. There had been some local media coverage, and the art world can be small and gossipy, but my boss at the gallery was surprisingly supportive. "Art is about truth and vulnerability," she told me when I finally explained everything that had happened. "You've experienced something profound, something that might even inform your curatorial vision in new ways. We stand with you." Her support emboldened me to be honest with my colleagues rather than hiding in shame. Many expressed admiration for my courage in facing down the people who had exploited me, and several shared their own stories of family betrayal or estrangement. What I had feared would isolate me instead created deeper connections. Layla remained my steadfast friend through everything. She helped me organize a support group for adult victims of familial exploitation, which met monthly at a community center near the gallery. There, I met others, whose experiences echoed aspects of mine. A man whose brother had stolen his identity, a woman whose mother had drained her college fund, an elderly gentleman whose children had tricked him into signing over his home. Sharing our stories helped all of us feel less alone and less foolish for having trusted people who should have had our best interests at heart. Together, we navigated the practical challenges of rebuilding credit and the emotional journey of rebuilding trust. My artistic background proved therapeutic as well. I developed a series of workshops that used collage and mixed media to help trauma survivors express emotions too complex for words. The act of physically tearing, rearranging, and transforming materials became a metaphor for the internal work we were all doing to reclaim our narratives from those who had tried to define us through their betrayal. About 6 months after the court case concluded, I received an unexpected letter from a woman named Patricia Sullivan. She introduced herself as Diane's younger sister, my biological aunt, who had been estranged from Diane for nearly 20 years. "I saw your name in the news coverage of the case," she wrote. I've often wondered about the niece I never got to meet. If you're open to it, I'd like to get to know you with no expectations or pressure. I approached this potential relationship with caution, meeting Patricia first, in a public place with Layla nearby. But my aunt turned out to be everything her sister was not: honest, straightforward, and respectful of boundaries. Over several meetings, she shared family history that helped fill in gaps in my understanding. Diane was always troubled, Patricia explained during one of our coffee meetings. Even before you were born, she had issues with lying and taking things that weren't hers. Our parents tried to get her help, but she always manipulated her way out of consequences. Patricia had kept photos of me as a baby before Diane cut off contact with her family of origin. She brought an album to one of our meetings, giving me glimpses of my earliest days that I had never expected to see. Your grandparents were saints, Patricia told me. They fought hard to keep you safe when they realized Diane and Jack weren't just immature, but actually dangerous as caregivers. Your grandfather stood up to Diane in a way few people ever dared to. Through Patricia, I also learned I had two half-siblings from Jack's previous marriage cousins on Patricia's side, and even a great aunt who was still alive at 91. I approached these potential relationships cautiously, but each connection helped me piece together a more complete picture of where I came from, without the manipulative filter Diane and Jack had created. As the one-year anniversary of my grandparents' deaths approached, I decided to honor their memory in a meaningful way. Using a portion of the restitution money that had been recovered from Diane and Jack, I established the Martha and William Mitchell Foundation, a small but focused nonprofit that provided scholarships and mentorship to young adults aging out of the foster care system. My grandparents gave me the stable foundation that allowed me to thrive despite being abandoned by my biological parents. I explained at the foundation's launch event. I want to help provide that same foundation for others who lack family support during the crucial transition to adulthood. The foundation became another piece of my healing journey, transforming the pain of betrayal into something constructive. Each young person who received support represented a small victory over the damage Diane and Jack had tried to inflict. My professional work evolved as well. I curated an exhibition titled Fractured Narratives, Identity, and Belonging in Contemporary Art that explored themes of family betrayal, reconciliation, and chosen community. The show received critical acclaim and traveled to 3 other galleries, bringing both professional recognition and a sense of having transformed my personal trauma into universal insight. During the opening night of the exhibition in its final location, a young woman approached me after my curator's talk. Your story, both personal and artistic, has helped me find the courage to establish boundaries with my own toxic parents. She told me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I realized I've been chasing approval I'll never receive instead of building the life and community I actually need. Her words struck me profoundly. In my journey from victim to survivor to advocate, I had come to understand that family isn't defined by blood or legal ties, but by love, respect, and mutual support. My grandparents had been my true parents in every way that mattered. Diane and Jack may have given me life, but Martha and William had given me everything else: values, education, security, and unconditional love. As I continue to build my life and career, I carry the lessons of this painful chapter with me. I am more cautious, yes, but also more authentic. I value the chosen family I've created among friends and colleagues who have proven their trustworthiness through actions, not claims. I honor my vulnerability as a strength, not a weakness to be exploited. True family are the people who show up, who stay, who support without exploitation, who love without conditions. My grandparents understood this fundamental truth, and in their absence, they left me not only financial resources, but the far more valuable inheritance of their wisdom and example. They taught me that our deepest wounds can become our greatest teachers, guiding us toward more authentic connections and a more compassionate understanding of ourselves and others. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? Share your stories in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Remember that your worth isn't determined by those who failed you, but by the love you choose to give and receive. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to create the family you deserve, whether by blood or by choice.